FLA Tribe? This is Coach Mike Klein. I'm going to go over an article from BioLane. It's called Stretching versus Lifting for Chest Gains, Volume 2. Basically, this is the influence of 8 weeks of supervised static stretching or resistance training of the chest muscles on maximal strength, muscle thickness, and range of motion. So I'll go into a quick summary on it, and then I'll get into the details if you want to stick around. So, overview real quick. So what did they test? Researchers investigated the effects of a static stretching program on the pectoralis major muscle, focusing on changes in maximal strength, muscle hypertrophy, and flexibility. What did they find? So the study found significant improvements in all measured parameters, strength, muscle thickness, and flexibility for participants in both the static stretching and the resistance training groups. So what does it mean for you? Although it may seem like static stretching is a viable alternative for traditional lifting, things are not as simple as they may seem. Traditional resistance training remains more accessible than high-intensity static stretching. It also comes with a plethora of health benefits that stretching does not offer. So even with me, I like to do weight training, and just stretching would seem more boring to me. But also the intensity at which these people needed to be stretched 15 minutes a day is what they did. Was intense. It wasn't like you can just kind of wave your arms around, hold this for 10 seconds, hold this for 10 seconds. It was very intense stretching in order to get the muscle thickness and flexibility and muscle hypertrophy to grow, basically, for just stretching, which is pretty awesome, though. If you can just stretch intensely and get muscle growth, that's pretty awesome. But there's a lot of factors that come into that. Weightlifting also has a lot more well-rounded benefits to it when it comes to cardiovascular fitness, lean muscle tissue, and all that stuff. So, long story short, you can't just think you're going to do static stretching and be okay, and think you can just cut out resistance training. This is not how it's going to work. But in this study, they did find similar results when it came to muscle hypertrophy and flexibility, when it came to both the static stretching only and the resistance training only group. So what they should do is do a little bit of both, and actually add a combination of people who did strength training and flexibility, or the static stretching routine. So that would be cool to see as well. But yeah, so static stretching does help with flexibility, muscle thickness. So that's something to think about. If you cannot do resistance training, that's definitely something to go into, to look at. But remember, you have to do it at a certain intensity in order to reap these benefits. Typically, when you do resistance training, especially if you're a beginner, honestly, just any kind of resistance training is going to help one shape or form. And then as you get to it, you'll obviously progressively go up in weight and do the progressive overload routine. But okay, so that's a long story short. I'm going to go into kind of the details of the problem, what they did, the hypothesis, and kind of go into the details of the results and why we can't just stretch and think it can replace resistance training. So understanding whether stretching can actually meaningfully contribute to muscle growth and strength can have very important implications for both recreational lifters, but also for fitness practitioners that work in untrained populations, i.e. the elderly as well. Additionally, an issue with the current literature is that stretching intensity is often subjectively measured by individuals' pain perception, which can affect the outcomes of such exercise routines. That's why I said intensity is important, just like resistance training. Training almost up to failure, within a few reps of failure, everyone kind of either stops a little too soon, or they go a little too hard and they get too fatigued to really reap the benefits there. So the purpose and hypothesis of this study is that this study compares the effects of a dedicated stretching routine for the chest muscles against conventional weightlifting. Moreover, since full-range resistance training is known to improve range of motion, the study evaluated whether a stretch-based regimen can offer similar, if not better, improvements in shoulder range of motion. So what did they test? They took 81 recreational actively individuals from university sports and fitness centers. These participants were divided into 3 groups, one stretching, one for strength training group, and the control group that did none of those 2 things. They didn't stretch, they didn't strength train, they did nothing. Boring, right? Study overview. The stretching group underwent a supervised static stretching regimen targeting the pectoralis major muscles 4 times a week, each session 15 minutes, total of 8 weeks. For the strength training, the group engaged in resistance training 3 times a week for the same duration, focused on exercise that targeted chest muscles. The control group did not participate in any of these. The 3 things they're looking at: maximal isometric strength test, muscle thickness measurements, and the range of motion. So intervention details for the static stretches they did on bench with their shoulders and arms positioned to maximize the strength on pectoralis major muscles. I won't go too far in detail, but they basically did chest and chest flexibility exercises in order to stretch out the chest. Intensity was set at the maximum the person could handle, so that's going to also alter the results. If you don't get enough or the intense right amount of stretching, then it might not give you the results that we're looking for. So it's going to change. It's going to be different with everyone. But it was basically a pretty intense 15 minutes of stretching. The strength training group performed exercise on the APEC deck machine, designed to target the chest muscle specifically, with the regimen adjusted to ensure progressive overload over the course of the study. So they did do a progressive overload where they slowly ramped up the weight as they got further down the line in the routine, down to 8 weeks. So what did they find when it came to muscle strength? Both the stretching and strength training groups saw significant improvements. The increase in strength was a high magnitude for both groups, indicating that static stretching can be effective as resistance training in enhancing muscle strength. In terms of muscle thickness, aka muscle hypertrophy, both intervention groups again saw significant increases. The magnitude of muscle growth was large for both groups and similar to the findings on muscle strength. Similar to the findings on muscle strength, there's no significant difference between the stretching and strength training groups in terms of muscle thickness. So what they're saying there is, if you just did static stretching or just resistance training, that there was less of a difference in increased muscle thickness. So this suggests that static stretching exercises, when performed with sufficient intensity and duration, can lead to muscle growth comparable to that achieved through resistance training. So they're saying, like, if you just do resistance training or if you did intense static stretching for these 8 weeks, they relatively thickness-wise grew the same. They also found significant improvements in the range of motion in the stretching group, with moderate and high magnitude increases when compared to the strength training group. So this indicates that stretching, you have more. Stretching is for the flexibility, and resistance training alone will not improve your range of motion as much as actually stretching your muscles out. They found a positive correlation on the left side, suggesting that muscle growth contributed to the observed increases in strength. So this relationship underscores the interconnectedness of muscle hypertrophy and strength gains, reinforcing the notion that enhancements in muscle size can positively affect muscle strength. So growing muscles does affect strength. Long story short there. So what do the findings mean? Suggests that static stretching can potentially serve as an effective alternative to resistance training for individuals looking to enhance muscle strength, grow muscle size, and improve flexibility. In contrast, though, the participants in the study did not spend hours on hours stretching at extreme intensity, but still managed to see similar strength and hypertrophy gains as the people lifting. The issue with these findings is that although the participants of the study were recreational active, it is unclear if they were resistance trained. If you're more resistance trained, you kind of have a more slower growth path. It takes a lot more in order for you to grow and get stronger. Although, this is by Elaine as well, I'm not a huge fan of dismissing evidence on lifting simply because of the training status of the participants involved. It does think that in the context of static stretching and muscle size gains, more evidence on resistance trained individuals is necessary before we go down the just stretch instead of lifting routine. So basically, we're not going to say just stretch and you're going to be fine. You're going to get the same benefits from lifting. I don't think that will ever happen when it comes to overall what lifting does for you. So this is not going to replace lifting, but it will help range of motion. It does increase. It doesn't hurt, right? It doesn't hurt to stretch, which is kind of what people have said before, where static stretching will reduce, strength gains and stuff like that. So the study in this meta-analysis shows that it doesn't. It's also worth noting, while stretching seems to be somewhat promising for some populations as alternative to resistance training, it requires specific conditions to be effective. So high intensity and the use of equipment to ensure this intensity. Sometimes doing self evaluations of yourself isn't really true when it comes to your pain threshold, your stretch threshold, and all that stuff. Um, so how can you apply these findings? In essence, while static stretching may potentially lead to meaningful strength, hypertrophy, and flexibility gains, more researchers need to fully understand whether we can really start considering it as a viable alternative to good old lifting. Do not replace static or lifting with static stretching. Lifting is good for a numerous amount of benefits. Fat loss, muscle gain. So who doesn't like all those things? Are the main ones. Longevity as well is coming into play. Having more muscle mass in general raises your metabolic rate, um, and all those good things. So yeah, if you got any questions, put them down in the comments, and we'll answer them. But keep lifting and do a combination of stretching, do yoga, uh, do hybrid workouts when it comes to like stuff like CrossFit and stuff, where you do like weightlifting and you do a little bit of hit work. All those things are beneficial. So see you next time.